Cruz from Gen KD here with our guest of the day. What's up?
Oh my gosh, so excited to be here.
Your name's Adam Cruz, right?
That's right.
Right. Melodic, easy name, right? Longer book title than name.
Yes, totally. I love watching political stuff, and anytime they come out with a new book, there's always like a large tagline or a large like slogan. I don't know why. I think also because it is tips and tales from an indie music nerd.
Oh, so you're the indie music nerd?
I think if you go down the rabbit hole of a particular topic for years and years and years and you don't stop, I think you qualify as a nerd on that particular topic.
I think we're all nerds in our own right.
Exactly.
But anyway, we're here to talk about music. And the interesting thing about your book, Adam, is that you talk about a lot of the problems that bedevil all of us, but through the lens of music.
Right.
So you come with industry disruption is probably the biggest thing. Tell us about that. What has happened to the music industry in the past 20 years?
Well, basically what ended up happening is it used to be this business model where there was like a one-to-one sale, and that's the fancy way of saying if someone was a platinum selling artist, they sold 1 million copies. It was very easy to figure out. Nielsen handled our scan system, so they knew every time you went to the store and bought one CD or
when
album.
we went to Virgin Megastore, beep, beep.
Exactly, and that translated to a transaction that was tracked and processed. And so that's why we have terms like platinum and gold. But in the era of streaming and digital, all of that changed. And that's primarily due to the fact that corporations went in and decided how we were going to consume music. And the big record labels, Sony, Universal Music Group, and Warner Music Group, really just allowed tech giants, in particular Apple, to decide the price. So when we became a digital music world, the price was set at 99 cents per track. And really, the major labels didn't really put up too much of a fuss around the price model at that point. And that I talk about as sort of the moment where we cut ourselves at the knees, so to speak, around the music business.
And this is where we ended up today. So I am a Spotify subscriber.
Yes.
So Spotify, if you are an artist with a song on Spotify, you get paid, get this, 0.00397 cents per stream.
That's exactly right.
How the hell did this become acceptable?
Well, because really, again, speaking about how the labels reacted to digital music and that 99 cents, can you imagine the same thing that happened with streaming? So when you have Spotify and other companies, they're really pairing the music with products. So in Apple's case, they're pairing it with a smartphone. And they made it really easy to use, and they changed the music game because now we didn't need to own CDs or albums anymore. Because you had access to it anytime you wanted, it didn't matter. So what that really changed, really everything, and that's how we started to get down this road of what's the value every time someone listens to something online. And so we slowly got to this point where now it's a fraction of a penny per stream. So that's not a livable wage. So if you can imagine, if you're an artist and you plan to make music solely from art, the notion of being a streaming artist is really like you have to pair it with touring, with merchandise, with other products, because you're not going to make a livable income if you're an artist in today's streaming world.
So, but there's been cultural shifts, several cultural shifts,
yes,
where, you know, it's been normalized that we pay $300 for a pair of sunglasses, right? But we don't want to pay for healthcare, for instance. You know, we assume that, you know, the government or our employer should pick up the cost. And that type of culture has permeated music as well.
Right.
No one pays for music.
Right.
When's the last time you heard someone say, oh, I went to the store and bought a song?
Right.
Or the few people who are, you know, activists like yourself in the music space actually paying for music?
Right.
That sounds so it's an anachronism completely. It's completely out of date. It's so 20 years ago.
Yes.
Is that culture shift really affecting artists?
Yes, because really before you had streaming and digital music, our biggest competitors, if you will, were other artists in the space. And like me, I run a record label, so other record labels in that context. But now in the streaming game, our biggest competitor is no longer other industry professionals or other creatives. It's free. Because how can you compete and convince people that they ought to pay for your product, in this case your music, when they can just access it for free, either legally or illegally?
So let's. You mentioned another thing in here. You mentioned about, you know, a lot of artists come to big cities like New York.
Yeah.
Right. Of course, this is the center for music.
Yeah.
As is Los Angeles and Nashville.
Yeah.
You know, these are all powerhouses depending on the genre of music that you're interested in. all these cities have become very expensive.
Yes.
So at the same time that pay has gone down for artists, housing prices have come up.
Right.
So do you feel like that's affecting, we'll call it the nation's artistic ability?
Yes, because I've been talking with a buddy of mine who really was an early reader of the book, and we had this interesting debate going because at sort of the last chapter of the book, I break down what I call sort of the gentrification of art. Gentrification of art is really what's happened where, just like you described, the price of the music gets down, corporations make more money, and then so it starts to permeate other facets of the music world. In this case, it happened in 3 ways: on Wall Street, on Main Street, and on the internet. So we've talked already about how Spotify allows this low pay rate, and they're only one. There's a bunch of them that only pay a fraction of a penny. That's gentrification of art on the internet. Use co-opting the music to corporatize it and make money, whereas today Apple is worth $1 trillion. Okay, so that's one. The second is the gentrification of art on Main Street. I talk about the ghost ship fires. If anybody's unaware, it was a fire that happened in Oakland, California, in a multi-use art space.
Oh, I've read about that. Yes.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was
semi-illegal art space.
Yes, and what it spawned other municipalities to take action on art spaces and close them down in the name of safety. But what ended up happening was there wasn't a replacement of that art space, so these communities have now become devoid of art. So that's what I call the gentrification of art on Main Street. Utilize taking spaces away from art, from creatives in the name of safety, or in gentrification's case, development of the space. Perhaps it was purchased by a corporate entity. So that's the second way. The last way is how we're taking art and really put it on the stock market. Case in point, like we were talking with Spotify, they are now a publicly traded company. So the art that we make is being co-opted to become this publicly traded company. And so Spotify is worth billions and billions of dollars by doing that. So I argue that we're experiencing sort of a threefold situation when it comes to gentrification of art.
Sounds like very similar to what's happened to news. A lot of the revenue has gone to Facebook and Google.
Yes.
And it's kind of wandered out of journalism and into the pockets of these big tech companies, which of course we're all dependent on and grateful for the things they offer them, such as the streaming thing. But in the end, it starts to eat into everyone's bottom line and destroy entire sectors.
Exactly. And I also argue that what we're experiencing is this sort of push-pull that happened, because now the same company that you're subscribing to for music will eventually become the same company that's in charge of your access to the internet. So now we start to realize what happens when the power becomes more and more consolidated over time.
And you know, that's what's interesting about this. So a lot of people would go and say this is a problem of capitalism, but I really don't think it is, personally. I think it's a failure of regulation or a failure of, you know, oversight.
Correct.
We won't even call it regulation, because all these companies that have made these super conglomerates had to go to the government to request permission to merge.
Correct.
And both parties, Democrats and Republicans, have signed off on these huge conglomerates. And they're very hard to challenge their power.
Exactly.
Low musicians, anyone really, a regular person has no power when they go up against a big, basically, and this might be controversial to call it, a trust. Yeah. You know, they have a certain slice of the economy and it's theirs. And this is endemic in all of our economy. We have 4 major airlines, we have 2 pharmacies, we have 1 sunglass maker, their name is Luxottica. You know, this is happening all over the economy. What I find interesting is that you see this in your own industry, and you document how this happened.
Right.
Do you think that there's a policy solution for any of this?
Well, some policy has already been enacted. For example, in the prior administration, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, really had established this basic ground rule around how we access the internet. That most of us know as net neutrality.
Of course.
That was the idea that the way that you access the internet was treated equally, and telecom would not step in to create these fast lanes where the more you pay, the faster your internet speed becomes, or they would block certain competitors' content. So all of that, the FCC agreed would not go down, the new internet order, if you will. Well, now with the new administration, Ajit Pai is the head of the FCC. What he's done is repeal net neutrality, which is directly impacting not just the way that we access the internet, but it really affects rural communities. You know, the part of the net neutrality order really provided funding for rural communities to access broadband. And obviously that's important when you consider education and,
Sure.
and access to resources for learning purposes. So there was a Lifeline program that the FCC enacted to help subsidize and provide bandwidth to those rural communities. Now, with the repeal of net neutrality, the Lifeline program is at a halt, is at a complete pause, and that money has been extracted out. So what used to be funding to help provide in these communities is no longer there.
Do you think?
So that's a direct result now.
Okay, so but without pointing fingers specifically
Sure.
at parties and whatnot,
Sure.
this is a generation-long problem.
Exactly.
In the past 30 years, we've allowed these mega conglomerates to form. They have unnatural market concentration, and they kind of dictate the rules. Naturally, if you control 30% of the market, you get to decide what the rules are. Then you suffer from regulatory capture when really the government's not regulating them. Really, they're telling the government how to regulate them.
Right.
So why should ordinary people care about this, especially music fans?
Because what you're seeing is, just to your very point, that the same sort of modus operandi is happening across the board. And you have to be very careful, because a lot of what you're experiencing on the internet is going to be not only regulated, but tracked, and they're marketing back to you product. You see now on your phone, if you even have a conversation with someone, it'll come up on your social media and be advertised back to you. The information, when you check that terms and conditions to sign up, they're selling your information and you've given them permission. So all of this is interconnected as it relates to music consumption, because that very thing that you're thinking innocently you're just accessing is being targeted back to you, or being sold to companies that make a profit by exploiting your personal data. And that's what we're really talking about in the end, is sort of security meets ease of use meets oligarchs, music oligarchs in this case.
So Kevin Caraballo says, we're super proud of you, brother.
Oh.
So you got some fans in the audience.
Thank you
so
so much.
let me push back a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
From a completely just neutral standpoint,
Sure.
like I'm just a regular guy. I can't change the world. I just want to listen to my music in the shower in the morning. Like,
So let me ask, where do you listen? When you do listen?
Spotify, of course.
Spotify.
Okay, so I can't really change the world. I'm just kind of happy that music is accessible to me. What do you have to say about that?
Well, my first question to anybody like you is, do you pay for music?
Of course not. Never have.
So what I think is important to understand is that if it's difficult for someone like you, because before we started, you expressed that music is something that you dabbled into, but it's not this thing that's like all the time happening in your life. I argue that there's a majority of us that do use music all throughout our day. It might be in the background, it might be in whatever space that you feel comfortable, but most of us are encountered or exposed to music all day. Think about the advertisements that you have to sit through to access that YouTube video. There's usually music underneath. Same with movie trailers, movies in general, on and on. Music is this thing, that's this thread that's always happening. And so what we ought to do is really use it to our benefit. I'm talking about creatives, because what we're doing is letting tech giants decide everything from the experience.
So the money hasn't really disappeared. It's just wandering into different pockets.
Well, that's why I talk about a lot. I keep talking about how the money that's earned in streaming is paid to not to artists, but to music publishers and labels, who then pay it to the artists depending on the deal they've struck.
No,
so you can see how that screws up the pipeline of income if it touches several hands before it gets to you.
But Adam, I grew up in Orlando in the late 90s. If I had any singing ability, I would have been in a boy band. The word on the street was that back then all the managers took all the money. So has anything really ever changed?
I argue that it has. Now the power of the managers and those sort of personalities has diminished, and that power has concentrated to the top in the form of tech giants, and in our case, our three biggest labels, because they still influence us indie guys, because we're responding to what the majors do, not unlike in other industries.
So would you suggest that all of this, all of these systemic problems are affecting the quality of music that we listen to today?
Absolutely, because as a creative, not only are you dealing with free as your biggest competitor, you're also dealing with your peers that are putting out music at an unbelievable rate. It used to be really costly to put out an album. I talk about in the book the Guns N' Roses album that took millions and took years to turn around. And now you can do it.
PR campaigns back then.
Forever.
It was yeah.
And now it's like you have a computer and you can make a beat and add some synths and boom, bam, boom, you got a release. You know, and so especially I love house music, and in house music we're inundated with the same kind of concepts, and so I think that it has diminished the quality because you're just getting anything you get too much too fast over time is going to be sort of that moment where it jumps the shark. We see it in TV and films and series that we love so much. After a while, they start to seemingly run out of ideas, and so that's that affects music as well.
I remember when I was in high school, Daniel Bedingfield produced his music in his room, an English artist, right?
Yeah.
And that was a big deal back then. Remember
Yeah,
that?
exactly.
And now that's everyone.
Well, now that I talked about how some artists are even doing most of their album from an iPhone. They bring it into a garage band and then
Well, this is the most powerful gadget in our lives.
It really is. And that's really started what I talk about in this book, how we're all in this mess now. I call it a mess because I don't see how this is a winning solution for artists to make any real income. And we ought to be protected more than we are if we're going to continue putting out music.
So how are you still making money? How have you figured out how to navigate this complex landscape?
So I always talk about a few things. So two main topics, I window and I pair. So every release that I put out, I try to pair with an appearance, some sort of whatever. It could be your birthdays. It could be as simple as your birthday. You know that on Facebook and on social media, you get a lot of attention on your birthday, a lot of people shouting you out. You could take that opportunity and leverage it to put place a release at that day. So that's an easy example of pairing, but more advanced is the start of a tour. It could be paired with that. So the idea of putting out a release without a strategy like that is really out of the question these days. So that's one thing I do. I also window, and for an indie music person, we figured out which of these streaming and download platforms have the biggest return, so the ROI. So that the biggest return for us was using an independent means. We mess with Bandcamp or TuneCore, where the fees, you get more of the fee than you would otherwise.
So they're disrupting these big companies'
Yes,
business
because
models.
if you're smart, you can window it. So you put it out on Bandcamp first, maybe wait 4 to 6 weeks. In our case, we put it out on the big dance site, that's TrackSource or Beatport. And then we wait another 4 weeks, and then we put it out on the Spotify's and iTunes. Why? Because their ROI, the return, is so low, a fraction of a penny, in fact.
Okay, so this is a good audience question then to segue. What is the actual monetary value of music then in today's world?
The actual monetary value is that it's a business card to start an entry point to something else. So most of us, if we're performing, we want to get on stage and get butts on the seats, if you will, at a concert venue, or you want to pair it with anything, shirts, merchandise. In my case, I'm pairing it with a book. So your job, if you're creating art these days, is to try to find those opportunities to pair your products or your content with something else so that you could attract attention to your art. And also engage in the windowing, staggering releases, if you will, because you want to get. And also for the book, I also put out an audio book, because in my world, a lot of us guys are constantly on the move and don't always have the time to read a book. So I thought, let's provide an audio book.
Talk about another industry that's changed.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, Audible and Amazon.
Exactly.
And, Audible's an Amazon company, has completely changed the nature of books and the way we consume them and buy them, etc.
So that's still the monetary value is to take it and pair it with other things. In my case, it's a book, DJ gigs, collaborating with other artists. I create a fiscal portfolio of a bunch of different work that together makes a livable wage for me. So that's the sort of the tips and tails, if you will, is that by doing this in a bunch of different ways, I put it together to create a portfolio of income that works.
So an audience question, how has your family been part of your journey?
Well, I think, first of all, when you take anything on like writing or recording albums, releasing music,
it's a lifestyle, huh?
You have to have a family that understands and is willing to do what my spouse, my love Sarah, and our 3 kids have been able to do, which is she will take the kids out for the day and leave me to my own devices. I have a home studio, so that helps a lot. I really talk a lot about the power of therapy. I've been in therapy for over 2 years. And this is my 3rd attempt at it, and I'm loving it so far. That helped a lot because there's a lot of feelings around writing books or releasing music and especially doing it in an independent way. So that was
Yeah,
really important.
you talk a lot about in the book some of the challenges and the pain that you've been through, and I guess writing channels a lot of that.
Yeah, and so I think part of the journey is really using what happened in my personal life to really create a therapy, and I use music as therapy. This is why I'm so incensed about this fraction of a penny nonsense, because we ought to be thinking of music as this therapeutic quality. There's so much money in Big Pharma, for example. We can go down that road. But what if music...
Talk about another industry
Yeah,
that has
exactly.
issues, yes.
But what if music was prescribed, like you'd be prescribed other medications? And some are doing that, but I think the royalty rate would increase substantially if it was done as an industry-wide thing. And even if that doesn't work, I say in the book, let's come up with some other ideas to really place music in other industry spaces that are just beyond entertainment, which is what it's being relegated to.
So who has been your greatest inspiration throughout this journey?
I have to talk about Mel Sharon. When I used to run an old disco label. If anybody's familiar with Loose Joints, Is It All Over My Face, or Tana Gardner, When You Touch Me, records like that. I used to run this old disco label, and the guy that's a pioneer for this sound, his name was Mel Sharon, and people around him call him the godfather of disco. And so Mel was really the biggest inspiration for...
You talk about him in the book a
Yeah,
lot.
because he really was a musical mentor. He was the kind of guy that was no nonsense. If he loved you, he had your back till his last breath. But if he hated you, you were the recipient of what I call a black letter, which was he would read you for filth in a letter and really would tell you about yourself and whatever however you transgressed, right? So Mel was this person that I really gravitated towards because he was no nonsense, and I loved that about him, and I learned a lot. I mean, Mel was a pioneer that he was behind things like, hey, we should put shrink wrap around records so that less come back cracked to the label. And so he got an award for that when he worked for ABC Paramount. And that was back in the day. He was also really instrumental in going to a famed nightclub, Paradise Garage. He was also financier for the club. He would go there and push his West End Records releases at the club. And there was a famous DJ that named Larry Levan that through these instances and circumstances created the perfect storm for success for all labels. You had to hit it at the club and get it to radio. And the way you did that, if you went to the garage, chances are that A&R on-air personality, Frankie Crocker from WBLS, was there at the club. Then on Monday, he'd be playing it on the air. So that's how it directly impacted. The record store would be bombarded with the sales of that record if it were popular on a Saturday night. There was a lot working that just isn't there anymore. And so what we need to do today is really find those avenues for income that work in a modern space, because I want to compel you to engage in music more than you do, because you're benefiting not only your life, but you're also benefiting artists who create. And so that becomes, I think, a recipe for a good prescription, especially around the therapeutic qualities.
So, an audience question: best platform then for artists today? You've touched a little bit on that.
Yeah, I think the way you should build it is to really try to centralize it through your own website and find the platform that yields the biggest income. So,
shop around.
Shop around and start to. I'm talking if you're a creative. If you're a person that is just enjoying music and you want to take a stand in some way, I would pay attention to what's happening in music, especially around the consolidation of power. Pick up the book and really understand how much it costs and how much the payouts are, or do a Google search for how much these platforms are paying out, and decide for yourself which one is if you feel you want to sort of, I call it stretching your altruism muscle. If you want to do that, then maybe take a stand in that way. But also, get politically activated. We are in an era where you can no longer remain silent. We all have to
even
be more
corporations.
active.
Speaking of corporations, they take on political
Exactly.
causes. Yeah, really remaining silent is seen as being complicit now.
Right, and it's out of vogue. It's sort of out of fashion, if you will. Even look at Nike. They have Colin Kaepernick. They're taking these sort of ads and becoming politicized, and it's because it's trendy.
They're touching the third rails on purpose.
Yes, because it's sort of acceptable now to be active in the way, and so I say take advantage of that. You know.
I hate that about modern society. I don't think corporations should have political stances, but whatever.
Right.
Nike's laughing their whole way to the bank because they understand their audience.
And also, since you're talking about Nike, I realized one thing about Nike. When they went public, it was under the auspices when you go public that you get a lot of people to work, so you're helping Main Street by employing a lot of people. Nike didn't really do that because they figured out a way to have less employees at their retail spaces. So now you actually, the reason why you go public is not working out. You do it for other reasons other than to raise funds because you're not really helping Main Street anymore.
Well, out of most modern companies that are the size of, so when you compare General Motors to Google, General Motors employed 10 times more people minimum. So a lot of modern companies are just cutting out labor.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's a huge problem for jobs and job quality, et cetera.
Especially in an industry where automation's a leader. A lot of these processes are all automated, and so there's that to consider as well.
Here's a good question from Kristen Fisher. We have the digital age now, so how will that change getting music out to the masses for the average Joe with no label? Does label even matter anymore with singing contests, etc.?
I think if you're an independent artist, you're always going to be compelled to release material. I think it does matter because just like in a book format and making a film, it's all art. So I think we should be supportive of anyone's endeavors to pursue art in some way. Now, the question about whether labels matter or not, I feel like labels have changed over. Even our three biggest labels that I've talked about, I argue, have become service firms. They leverage their power to say, okay, if you sign with us, then we could get you on Live Nation's roster, and then now you tour the world.
So they still bring a lot of value to the table for
yes,
artists?
but not in the way that it used to be. It used to be that you couldn't really do anything without the major label there to support you. Now, with the advent of digital music and social media, so there's that like sort of plus and minus. Social media has really leveled the playing field in terms of the power that artists
So this
have.
is an incredibly positive development for a lot of artists.
And yeah, because now if you're popping, your label is actually very interested in signing you. Whoever's interested is actually interested in signing you because of the followers you have, which we could have a debate about whether that's a worthy assessment or not. But that's the age that we're in.
I think that's a very appropriate question.
But I do have to say one thing, which is one thing that we need to be aware of is we used to co-sign the Billboard #1 singles. They're not the only. Many do #1, and so you brag about being #1.
Of course. For how many weeks?
Yeah.
I was #1 for
Exactly.
5 weeks. Whatever.
You should realize in the advent of streaming, now they've had to fold in not just physical sales, but digital sales, that streaming data we talked about, radio airplay. So all of this has been folded into the numbers. So now what your #1, the sense that you've gone #1 is completely built on sand because it's not on direct sales anymore as it used to be. Now it's built, they have to adapt to the environment we're in. You see, so that
that's
changes.
not an exact science, is it?
No, and I talk about how complicated the math is to figure this out. And then you had like Rihanna, when she put out her Anti album, she started to tweet about how BS it was that she was considered #1 because she basically, the label parlayed her release with a Samsung smartphone offer.
Oh, so it was preloaded on one of these?
Yes, I talk about U2 and how they forced their album on everyone, and so now that was considered millions of streams because they forced the product on you, and so got to be careful with these things. Prince did it really early on,
So throughout your journey, what do you consider your biggest accomplishment? So you've lived through this journey and lived to tell about it. How much it's changed, how it's gotten better, how it's gotten worse. What's been your biggest accomplishment amidst all this rapid change?
I think that I'm proud of myself that I was able to realize the power of pairing my passions for DJing and songwriting into what I do today, which is I work with a lot of different labels, and out of that experience, I formed a small digital distribution label, and that was a smart decision because I knew that I couldn't really make it just by operating my own record label, which is Mixtape Sessions. I thought, let me distribute some others and help them along the way because I can provide services like mastering. I happen to graphic design for many years, so I can do the artwork cover. So there's a myriad of things I'd be able to provide. So I use that and leverage that skill set to start a digital distribution company. So I think that's really what is the future, is realizing your gifts and putting it together to create what I call a portfolio of income. And so that's really the big deal for me and the big takeaway. And also, like I said, I think the big takeaway out of all of this is how important it is that you support artists, like the importance of family being there for you as you take this journey to write a book or a poem or make a film or whatever. We should be supportive of those in the arts or those that have a dream in that way. That's why these contests exist, the America's Got Talent and all that, because we all aspire to create in some way. And
of course.
So I think that's every story,
So tell us about some of the artists you've worked with.
Okay, so I've been around a while. So I work in house music. We're in this sort of small community, but it's known. So I work with Blaze, which is Kevin Hedge and Josh Milan. I also started a label with Josh Milan called Honeycomb Music. Shout out to Josh. So my label, Mixtape Session, has been rocking for 10 years. So at Mixtape Sessions, I worked with a Broadway star, Lilius White. She won a Tony. She was great. Love you, Lilius. Shout out to Jacqueline Graham, Eddie Nicholas. I've worked with, gosh, it goes on and on. Just a bunch of really great artists that are independent, but have been making great moves. Dawn Tallman, shout out to her. Great artists that are in the soulful house vein, that have done some really quality things. And I've just been excited to be able to work with them. I think because mostly I'm a fan, if I'm really honest with myself.
So Michael has an audience question, Michael Watson, and I'm going to modify it a little
Sure.
bit. He's a young guy, he's a musician, when you struggled, he says, have you ever struggled and found it
Absolutely.
difficult? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So we know that.
Yep.
But what's your advice for Michael and for all the young musicians out there who are just getting started, and remember, they don't remember what it used to be like.
Right.
You're just relaying it to them.
Right. Well, I think the first order of business is to get your business together. So if you are a writer, you should be signed up with the Performance Rights Society. So that's your ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. Do your research and decide which one is best for you. But you need to establish a track record whenever you release product. So you need a Performance Rights Society because they deal with the performance royalty. Now, you also need to sign up with other services like Sound Exchange, which will handle digital performance. You need to make sure that you are, in my case, I'm an LLC because you want to make sure that you handle your taxes appropriately and you're limited in terms of your liability, which is why I have an LLC.
So you have to be an entrepreneur.
Yes, but you have to get all that business together because it's actually easier than ever to release music, but it's harder than ever to track it. I also talk about the importance of getting an international standard recording code. It's like a tattoo on music. And so you need that because you want to track where your music's floating through. And then I would just utilize your local network a lot more. And like I always been saying, diversify your income. So you want to make it in music, then try different avenues in the music game. There's a lot of angles here. It's not just creating music and releasing it. There's a lot to it. So see if you can bring some skills to the table. That's a major way.
Okay, quickly before we go, where do we get the book? You
can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Audible. Visit my own website if you want to support the independent route, mixtapesessions.com. Or I've been posting it everywhere, so follow me on Instagram.
All the socials.
All the socials.
Okay,
yeah.
and where can we see you DJ?
Oh, so every summer I'm at the Newark Public Library. We do the library music sessions. We have about 1,100 people that come every week.
Funky library, huh?
Yeah, it's a funky library. We'll be coming up, God willing, our 3rd season. So we start at Memorial Day and end at Labor Day. And so come every Friday, 6 to 11 in Newark.
The best time of year here.
It's really the best. It's nice and warm. It's outside. It's free. It's a few hours of myself, Deuce Martinez. We started a label, speaking of parent, and a station. The station is D Wild Music Radio. And so all I did was take my passions for DJing and songwriting and started these different things. Distribution company, radio station, book writing, all that stuff together.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
Grab
so much.
the book, and I might be there when it's warm to watch you DJ.
Through. Yes, Friday, 6 p.m. Newark Public Library. But thanks so much, everybody. Also, I have an app. Download the free app. Search out Freedom Radio Hour.
Yeah. Freedom Radio Hour. There you heard it. Join us next time.